The What to Read Next podcast helps you build a TBR of future favorite books. In each episode, Lori and Maine interviews authors and book influencers to recommend books they loved for you to pick up today. If you're an avid reader, always looking for your next great read, then the show's for you. Hi, Julie. Welcome to What to Read Next podcast.
Hi.
So in this interview, we also have Addie Yoder. So hi, Addie. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
So, Julie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, geez, I don't know. I started writing. I've always been a writer, even as a child. Once I learned to read and write, I would write little stories, just daydream a lot. I used to get into trouble for that in school. But when I wanted to finish college, and I went back and had to take one history course. I was a 4-year RN major and had taken all the sciences, but I needed 3 hours of history, and for a 4-year degree. And I couldn't think of anything more boring. But I took a course that would fit the schedule, and it was Russian history. And the teacher, Sister Joan, was amazing, and I loved it. I loved the course. And I thought, I'll just take one more. And that one was Ancient and Medieval. And the whole idea of such a disciplined time with the feudal system and the manor, and I loved it. Everyone had their place, and I thought how fun it would be if someone didn't fit. So I liked to write, but I never showed it to anyone. So I decided to get a knight ready to go into battle. And I thought I was being so smart. I was going to describe him without describing him. And so, example, it takes 2 servants to lift his shield, and he picks it up with, one finger practically. And they have to stand on a stool to put his helmet on, things like that. So he's tall, he's strong. And anyway, I got him all ready to go into battle, and I thought, now what? And I decided to mess with him, so I gave him Elizabeth. And that I titled it The Warrior. When it sold, it was Gentle Warrior, which really, if you think about it, is an oxymoron. But that led to another book, and I was hooked. I kept taking more history classes, but my heart belonged to medieval at that point. And that's kind of what I've been doing.
I love this. Oh my gosh. I love this so much. It's an unexpected class that led you to a career,
True. I also, it used to be you became a teacher or a nurse. Mm-hmm. And the field has way opened since then. I have a daughter who's an MD, and nobody told her she couldn't, which is pretty cool. My mom used to say, you can be anything you want, but learn to type. And I always thought that was hilarious. But what she meant was, you can support yourself while you're going for your dreams by, getting a job as a typist somewhere. And she's got to be smiling now because I type all day long. So anyway, when I started too, I didn't know about categories or any of that. My 4-year-old, Jerry was 4, and he liked to ride his big wheel. Well, he couldn't be outside unless I was outside with him. So I would sit on the steps, and he would go from the neighbor's garage up to the corner and back. And one day, there was a grandmother who had moved in with her granddaughter, and she was standing at the corner. My worry was that he'd run over her. She was very frail, but he got off his big wheel, talked to her for a minute, and then took her hand and led her back home. And then he ran over to me, who was very proud of himself, and said, "Grandma forgot where she lived, but I remembered." I could not get that out of my mind, and I ended up writing what became a YA, although I didn't know that. I thought it was just kids, you know. And I wanted to tell the story of a grandmother or father, and I chose father, moving back in with his daughter and how it would affect the dynamic in that family. Well, who would be the most emotional about it? Well, it would be a 13-year-old girl, right? So that's the story I wrote, and it was called The Girl Named Summer, because that was her name. But anyway, so I was told when an agent took me on that was called the YA. Anyway, she sent that to Scholastic. They turned it back down. The editor said, "No one wants to read about old people." And then about a week later, she called the agent and said, "I can't get that story out of my head. I'm buying it," which was lovely, you know. It actually ended up doing extremely well. So I'm glad I wrote it. I'm talking way too much, aren't I?
No, this is so good. I know, Addie, you want to ask her another question?
Oh yeah, I'm like absorbing all of it.
Yeah, this
I'm
is
just
like
listening. I could do this all day. I think that it's so interesting how authors that like you that I've read for a long time, it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like when you started writing, you had the freedom to do whatever you wanted because you wrote such great historical books, but you also wrote Western romance, right?
I wrote, the first Western I ever wrote was a story for the Roses.
Yes.
And that was because it had to be, the story I saw in my head had to be in that time period. And I don't know. I did not want to switch to contemporary, but
Okay.
I couldn't get this one story to work. It had to be modern day. You want to hear how that happened?
Yes,
My sister,
please.
we called her Cookie. Her name is Mary Collette. I took her with me to London, and she only had one rule. We had to go to Mass every day, which I said, yeah, okay. So we get in, we're zombies because we are, neither one of us had ever been there. And we are so excited that we don't sleep at all on the plane. We get there, get unpacked, and then we find out that there is a Mass at this church, I don't know, a couple of miles away. So we get into the taxi and go there. I'm like a zombie at this point. And we get into the church, and it's a real old, beautiful church. Have either of you ever seen the movie Sisterhood with Goldie Hawn? Not Goldie Hawn, Whoopi Goldberg.
yes.
She plays the nun. Well, anyway, the priest looked exactly like that actor, which I thought was kind of funny. And when he gave the sermon, he talked about the prodigal son. But then when he got to here's the reason for the story, kind of, or the punch, he just stopped and said, "But I know you know." And the congregation, most of them were nodding. Then he told another parallel, or parable, whatever, I can't remember which one it was. And yet again, he gets to the punchline, what I call the punchline, and he pauses and says, but I know, I know that you know. I'm not making this up, by the way. Well, I kind of got tickled. The third time it happened, the I know, you know went on, and I leaned down to Cookie and said, I don't know, which made her laugh. And so then she moved. She wouldn't sit with me for the rest of the service. So I'm sitting there kind of daydreaming, and there's a confessional with this heavy velvet curtain. And I started thinking about the sins that these priests have heard over the years, right? And then I thought, what if the sin is something he's going to do? And that was the beginning of the book, Heartbreaker. So I daydreamed in church, and I'm going to pay for it probably. But and I couldn't put it in a historical setting. So the rest of the Buchanans came to life then. That's how that all got started. Complicated, huh?
Yeah, but then you just never stopped. Like, you just kept going with this family. Did you just fall in love with them?
Well, oh yeah. But the first Buchanan was historical. The Secret. Roderick Buchanan is one of the commanders under Ian Maitland. And then he gets his own story in Ransom. So that's way back in 1200 or 1100. Then come forward, and the first modern Buchanan is Nick Buchanan, and the story is Heartbreaker.
I am so glad that you brought up the historical Buchanans, because that, to me, I loved that connection when I read. I cannot get enough of stories with overlapping characters, and that when you get bits and pieces of the characters from previous books. So I think that's part of why the Buchanan Renards are so, like I pre-order every single one, and I can't stop. And then I give them to my mom and my best friend, and we all just can't stop reading them.
It's so funny to me because they say, well, where do you come up with these ideas? It's always one scene that I see, and from that I know the whole book. But I'm trying to think, give you an example. The ideal man, the opening line is, the first time she slit a man's throat, she felt sick to her stomach. The second time, not so much. Well, and then you find out she's a surgeon. But from seeing that scene in the operating room, I knew the whole story. I don't know how that works. I used to get a lot of daydreaming in during my kids' sporting events, which is terrible to say, but come on, T-ball is, and my friends would say, oh, Jerry's up, and I'd yell the appropriate good eye or whatever, and watch. But I did a lot of plotting there. So anyway.
I think we would have sat together at ball games, because I do similar things. I put audiobooks in my ears and kind of sit further away from the other moms, because I know I'll distract them.
Oh, I have to tell you, I think this is funny. My youngest loved football, and he was, I guess you'd call him a running back or whatever. And as a freshman in an all-boys high school, he, very few were elevated to varsity. And he came home one day and said, Mom, I'm the new punt returner. Well, I didn't know much about football back then. And I thought, well, that's nice. Never occurred to me to ask what happened to the old punt returner. So I go to the first game or the next game, and